Last week we introduced the 25 word identity of the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church is a global church which delegates authority, personalizes faith, sends disciples of Jesus to transform the world with God's love. Last week we unpacked the global church. Today we're going to unpack the very boring subject of delegating authority. Now, as I mentioned this boring subject, Maddie is in the room with me, and I've got to say that she has a smirk on her face because we've talked a bit about this and how it really sort of unleashes all kinds of understandings of what we're about as United Methodist Church. It's really exciting to talk about the delegation of authority for me because it has to do with relationships, and that's the key to who we are as the United Methodist Church. Now, a basic understanding is needed, first of all. Power and authority are not synonyms. A lot of times in biblical translations, they are translated as synonyms. But in Greek, two different words. Exousia is the word for authority. Dunamis is the word for power. And they're radically different in understanding. And the difference is the source of my authority is from the outside, and authority is given to me. Power is from the inside, and we use the phrase, it's a person's gifts and graces that we can live out as disciples of Jesus Christ. So authority is given from the outside to a person or an entity. Power is from the inside, the gifts and graces we have to exercise the authority that's been given to us from the outside. Now, one way of saying that is that one is given authority in the church to use their gifts and graces for particular responsibility and particular missions in the name of the church. So authority is given to a person to utilize their gifts and graces in ministry and in mission. Now, that in a nutshell is what the Book of Discipline is all about. It is unpacking what it means to delegate authority. Now, I can just use my artistic ability, which you all know is just incredible. But when authority is centralized, this is what it looks like. And someone or some entity is finally in charge of everything. And it's a hierarchy, and there are different levels in that hierarchy, and one finds themselves somewhere in that hierarchy, but authority is finally centralized, and everything flows in to that organization or that entity. Probably in the church, the most clearest illustration of the hierarchy is the papal authority in the Roman Catholic Church. Everyone knows in the Roman Catholic Church who's here, who's here, who's here, who's here, finally the cardinals, and then the Pope. The United Methodist Church doesn't look like that, because when authority is delegated, it looks like this. Here's an individual, here's a group of individuals, here's an entity of some sort, and you've just got all these, entities, and then the relationship is here to here to here, back to here, 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 and you say, that is really confusing. Yep, and that's delegation of authority. But when understood, it is incredibly clear. The hierarchical and centralized authority is so wonderful because it's so efficient. Any hierarchy is efficient, and we almost stand in jealousy of efficient organizations. But delegated authority is oftentimes inefficient. For instance, no one makes a decision without another individual or group also participating in that decision. Well, that's sort of inefficient. It takes time. But in taking time, the relationships are built of authority being delegated in partnership with others. Relationships are built for the community to be formed as an organizational entity that we refer to as the United Methodist Church. And my experience is, the beauty of this is that a person's gifts and graces, when given authority to do a task, mission or ministry in the United Methodist Church, those gifts and graces are unleashed towards that mission and ministry. But oftentimes the gifts and graces of a person in a hierarchy are not unleashed because they're carefully contained, as authority is centralized rather than delegated. Okay, let's use a couple illustrations. First of all, as you know, I'm an elected bishop of the church, and the office of bishop is oftentimes thought to be the top of the hierarchy. I used to always joke, you know how the hierarchy is looked at. Here you have the bishop, and then you have the pastors of large churches, and then you have the cabinet, and then you have the clergy of the denomination, then you have the local pastors of the denomination that are not considered to have full membership in the annual conference, and then whoops, you have the laity of the church. And you as laity know how that feels if this is your identity in a hierarchy. But that's not the United Methodist Church. United Methodist Church is, a bishop is an individual. And if I wanted to do something, have a program that cost a few bucks in Dallas, all of a sudden, I couldn't decide to do that because I don't have any money. I have to go to the conference CF&A to get any money, and they can't allocate any money unless the annual conversation said that they had some money that they had authority to spend in that way. And on the other hand, say I wanted to appoint a pastor to a certain church. I couldn't do that because the appointment has to be made, first of all, in consultation with the local church, and it has to be made with the cabinet. And so I couldn't do that alone. And so all of a sudden you realize that the delegation of authority insists on building relationships of trust to form a community of faith, as over against centralized authority. All one has to do is understand who makes what call when, and you can get that job done. There's no insistence organizationally on the development of relationships. But now let's look at the local church. If it was a hierarchy, and you can look around Winfield and see some local congregations who are formed as a hierarchy, and their pastor is at the top of the hierarchy. And then there's a group of elders or deacons or whatever organizational tag they have on that have authority underneath the pastor. And then you have the different levels of the hierarchy in those congregations of centralized authority. And so Maddie wakes up every morning saying, oh, wow, I wish I was here, and therefore I wouldn't have to go to the finance committee for money, or I wouldn't have to go to the church council to get a decision made, or I wouldn't have to talk to someone to get their input before a decision is made. Because yes, Maddie has authority given to her, but just like a bishop in an annual conference, that authority is confined and restricted and always in relationship to other people. And so as a layperson in the church, you wish there was a hierarchy that all you have to do is come in and check with Maddie. If Maddie says go, you say go. And in the United Methodist Church, Maddie says, well, we need to take that to the church council or the worship committee or the fellowship committee. We can't just do it because I say it's going to be done. To me, it's exciting because the organizational principle is to build relationships, to assure community and the strength of togetherness in going together, rather than being very efficient and getting the job done quickly, sometimes to the deterioration of relationships rather than enhancing those relationships of trust and love. And as lay people, you need to understand that you're the reason why we're organized the way we are. General Conference is not a hierarchy. The bishops do not even have voice or vote at General Conference. Why? They wanted decentralized authority, not a hierarchy. And when the United Methodist Church, when the Methodist movement became a church, happened to be in America when it happened, what was the cry? Politically, monarchy, go home. For the church, hierarchy, go home. And you know who had to go home? The Church of England, in which the Methodist movement existed. So the Church of England, a hierarchy, went back to England, and what was left? A Methodist movement to form itself in a different way. And as it was formed in 1984, just 8 years after the revolution in 76, when you think of that difference, it all had to do with forming the church around the principle of delegated, not centralized authority, monarchy, go home. Indeed, in the local church, we're not a hierarchy. We're a network of entities, committees, and as a friend of mine, Jack Toole, wrote in his book, we're organized to beat the devil. Some would say we're over-organized, but in the wisdom of our fathers and mothers who went before us in the denomination, it all had to do with building relationships in order to have a community of faith rather than a hierarchy that one person finally is in charge of everything. So that's the book of discipline. And a friend of mine who had a comparable job of a bishop in another denomination, we were talking about a particular issue. And that person said, Bruce, I would kill for your book of discipline because we don't have that. And I cannot tell you how many times I look at the United Methodist Church that from the outside looks so confusing and so bewildering and so organized, it drives you crazy. But I can tell you as an outsider looking in, it's wonderful because you have got a guideline, the accumulated wisdom of 250 years of how the church can move forward in ministry and mission, building relationships to have community rather than the efficiency of a church hierarchy that is most common among Christian churches today. And so a question for you to think about is your own journey in the United Methodist Church. And that is, when have you discovered and experienced your gifts and graces being identified and authority given to you to fulfill a certain responsibility or be a part of a certain cause? What are your experiences of saying, wow, the community has given me the authority to do this in their name, and I've got to use my gifts and graces to do the very best I can? What are your stories about that? And on the other hand, what are your illustrations of human organizations in which authority is centralized like a hierarchy? Can you identify that? Have you been a part of some of those? What does that feel like, being here rather than here? But finally, what happens when a person or group tries to claim or seize authority and centralize it in community of faith that delegates authority? You've all seen this attempted and tried. What happens when authority is delegated as over against centralized? What happens when a person tries to seize authority and impose this on that? In the answer to that question, you'll describe some of the history of the United Methodist Church and some groups that have separated from the church, as this has been their desire, and it couldn't be accomplished because authority is delegated. Thanks for listening.